Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes and then we will be playing a special impact video.
It's the mission of the Urban Land Institute to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact. That's what we do at ULI Toronto. Our members work in all aspects of land use.
ULI is a catalyst. It's a catalyst for people who in themselves are thought-provoking, are interesting, they're purposeful, they're engaged, and they want to have an impact on the world.
The Toronto region is definitely a stronger, more robust place because of the championship role that the Urban Land Institute Toronto has played in elevating the status of women in the industry.
Our industry has a responsibility to meaningfully contribute to the social fabric of our communities and to be a climate change leader.
In Toronto, ULI helps deliver climate change and resiliency that is equitable and valuable.
ULI Toronto help mid-career professionals reach the next stage of their careers as city builders.
ULI Toronto is an entry point and a launching pad for our next generation of leaders to find their place in this very complex industry.
ULI Toronto brings global best practices to our city and shows our city's innovations to the world of real estate.
ULI creates really good conversations about important public policy subjects for our members.
It brings leading developers across our city together to wrestle with the crisis of affordability. We need solutions for our industry, tenants, and new home buyers alike.
The ULI network is incredibly effective in bringing in key stakeholders to build solutions to support Black communities.
I'm proud to work alongside ULI in seeking to accelerate accessibility and ensure that our built environments meet everyone's needs for access.
ULI Toronto is well positioned to help the real estate and development industry identify opportunities to meet a generational need to advance truth, justice, and reconciliation. ULI demonstrates the unique power in leveraging the built environment, whether that's private real estate development or public infrastructure, for the benefit of a more competitive and equitable city.
I am so excited as ULI Chair to celebrate these positive solutions that our real estate development community has brought forward for Toronto.
At ULI Toronto, we connect, we inspire, and we lead.
So if that didn't inspire you, and I hope it did, there are also many other reasons to become a ULI Toronto member if you're not already. That includes accessing ULI's network through the Global Membership Directory, engaging locally on ULI committees and initiatives, accessing an unbelievable wealth of local and global ULI resources, case studies, past webinars, and expanded offerings of member-only events, educational programs, and behind-the-scenes project tours. Most recently, ULI Toronto members have started receiving a valuable new weekly or curated by stories. And if you join ULI this month, you get to have a coffee on ULI. Details will be put into the chat about membership. And now on to today's program. My name is Linda Weichel of Weichel Impact Advisory Services, and I'm pleased to be hosting today's session, Toward Truth and Reconciliation, How CRE Companies Are Leading the Way. This beautiful photo is thanks to the folks at TAS, and the photo is of Cote Harper, who is a First Nations collaborative dance artist, and she was performing at TAS's Walmer Legacy Space community event. But before we get into this, as always, we will begin with a land acknowledgement. I am going to invite everyone to read these words, and I would like to share a little bit more about how ULI is connecting this acknowledgement with its work. ULI Toronto is firmly on the path to truth and reconciliation through its Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Reconciliation Council and its educational program, including today's webinar. And you'll see a link in the chat to the ULI page dedicated to past and future webinars and resources. Over the past 2 years, ULI Toronto has also co-hosted an inaugural workshop series with Shared Path Consultation Initiative, Allied, and West Bank to advance education, engagement, and economic reconciliation more deeply with senior executives of 31 organizations. Through these initiatives, ULI is offering a platform for the truth shared by Indigenous peoples and for promising practices of collaboration between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in line with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's Call to Action number 92 for Corporate Canada. If you're interested in contributing to ULI Toronto's next phase of work towards truth and reconciliation, do let ULI know. I also wanted to flag 2 related ULI Toronto programs in the coming weeks. Registration has just opened for an intimate cultural competency training program offered by Bob Goulet of Nipissing Consulting that will take place on October 22nd at the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto, and a very special members-only engagement on November 12th with Chief Claire Salt of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the treaty holders for most of this urban region, including the City of Toronto. Now, today's event and all ULI programming would not be possible without the support of ULI's annual sponsors. Now more than ever, ULI Toronto relies on the support of sponsors to put on high-quality programs and to drive the mission to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. To all the sponsors, thank you. And now on to our program. Throughout the conversation, if you have any questions for the panelists, please submit them via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen or upvote questions that are similar to yours. Now, I mentioned the workshop series ULI Toronto has been co-hosting. 3 of the companies participating have agreed to give us insight today into their early journeys. And to pull these stories out is today's moderator. Selina Young is Director, Indigenous Affairs Office, City of Toronto. Selina is a member of ULI Toronto's Management Committee and also chairs its Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Reconciliation Council. We want to thank Selina for participating today, just days before the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and we acknowledge the incredible demands that we are asking of our Indigenous colleagues, especially around these milestones. In doing so, the ULI team acknowledges that as Indigenous people, that truth and reconciliation demands that we all share in the commitment to the pursuit of education and justice. Over to you, Selina.
Merci, Linda, thank you. Selina. Very grateful to be with all of you today. Today's webinar has 2 important objectives. First, we're going to have a wonderful opportunity to learn from some companies who have begun to act on truth and reconciliation. And we hope that by hearing from these folks, you'll be inspired, and other companies will be inspired to join the movement towards reconciliation. It was a number of years ago, I was having some doubts about this work of truth, justice, and reconciliation. And I remember an elder emphasizing to me how important it was for all of us to be part of what she called this movement. Wherever we work, live, and play, all organizations and people have a responsibility, she reminded me. Today, we are blessed to have 3 wonderful people whose companies have joined the movement and are taking responsibility. Really grateful to have Anna Bailão, Ariana Holt, and Alexandria or AJ Winterburn join us. Kitchi Merci, big thanks to the 3 of you for coming today. I'm keen to hear from all of you, as I'm sure the participants are. So I'm going to jump right into the questions. And whoever feels like answering first, please do, and then the others can add following. We'll get started just hearing a little bit about your journey. So if you could dive a bit into your company's specific areas of work on reconciliation, and could you share some of the unique aspects and what is your company doing related to the work of truth and reconciliation? Who would like to kick us off?
I can start. Thanks, Selina. It's great to be here and share a little bit about what Taz is up to, our journey. There's two related things I wanted to share about. Hopefully I don't take up too much time. You can stop me if I do. But one is our Truth and Reconciliation Action Plan, which we released in June this year. This plan reflects our understanding of how we think we can contribute to reconciliation and have the greatest impact. It took almost 2 years to complete because we spent a lot of time learning and listening and building relationships. And we were also simultaneously doing things and working on projects, and which all of these things really informed our plan and made it really meaningful. The plan has 6 pillars: so ceremony, engagement, stewardship and placemaking, economic empowerment, and governance. And then there are actions under each one of the pillars. The plan really helped us to organize ourselves and create a framework for all of the different types of work that we were doing around reconciliation, all the things that we wanted to do, and also helped to create some accountability. It's also given us some legitimacy and a starting point for conversation when engaging with Indigenous groups. We've had a lot of great feedback, people reaching out to us and wanting to collaborate. So it's been, really great step forward for Taz, and encourage you to read it. We'll share the link at the end. Of course, a plan is just a plan, and the real work is how you implement the plan and take action. And that's why I wanted to share an example of how we're doing that. I think when we think about reconciliation in the real estate industry, we often go to thinking about the big things like how do we build equity for Indigenous groups, build affordable housing and create shared investment opportunities, or improve our procurement systems and so on. And these things are very important. Taz is working on them. I imagine Anna will talk about that today. But I think that there's other ways as well that owners of land and developers of land can contribute to reconciliation while we're sort of working on the bigger things and while not losing sight of those things. And that's what I want to talk about. So looking at, how do we encourage the use of our sites for Indigenous programming, activations, and storytelling, collaborating and building relationships with Indigenous groups and the communities around where we're building, incorporating Indigenous stewardship and storytelling design principles, etc., into our projects. And so an example of this, what I wanted to share, and this is the last thing that I'll say at this point, is our Walmer Road legacy space. So it was referenced at the very beginning. The Walmer Road Baptist Church is located in the annex, and Taz has partnered with the church to redevelop this site. So we'll be restoring the sanctuary and building a new church and as well as some new residential housing. And early on in the engagement process for this project, we heard about from the community, there was a desire to honor diverse histories in this community. So, looking beyond the built heritage and looking at different kinds of stories, and that included the Indigenous history. So we decided our starting point would be to do some cultural competency training with ourselves in the church, our partners. We did a walking tour with Indigenous group First Story. And then building on this work, we partnered with the Downey Wenjack Fund to create a legacy space. So the legacy space is a program that Downey Wenjack Fund runs, and legacy spaces are meant to create safe places for conversation and reflection about reconciliation. So this legacy space exists temporarily on the front of the church and eventually will be incorporated into the future design. It has a beautiful mural and Indigenous plants, interpretive signage that it talks about the Indigenous plants. We've recently added some seating that was designed by the Brooke McElroy Indigenous Design Studio. And, it's wonderful when I pass by, I often see people, reading the signs and sitting and enjoying the garden and looking at the murals. So I think it has a lot of impact that way. But we've also had some really amazing events and programming around this legacy space. And, we invite the Annex community and the church, people from TAS, and we all come together. And we've invited this year, for example, we had a group called Nimki and the Ninnies, and they brought drummers and dancers and shared some teachings with us. All these people ate Indigenous food and danced together. It was really special. And I think, certainly is a step towards reconciliation. These kind of things might be small, and the impact might be small, but I think they're still important, and they also help us learn, and like we build relationships, which helps us get to the bigger things. So I think that was the story I wanted to tell about what TAS is up to. Is we're working on the big stuff, but we're also doing this little stuff, and that's really helping informing the work that we're doing.
Amazing. Thank you, Ariana. Just to emphasize the significance of relationships that you did, right? As you've experienced and you shared, right, the power of the relationships can lead to small, medium, big things, but without that foundation of building those and writing those relationships, it's really difficult to start to do the great things that TAS is doing. All right, AJ or Anna, would you like to share?
I can go next and share, and I'll start by picking up on that point of partnerships and listening and engaging, and that is a big part of what we do at DREAM. I've only been here for a year, so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about has started way before I got here. And I have incredible colleagues that have worked so much and learned so much, and I've heard them talk about the journey since the beginning and how they took it as a learning experience. And I think that is really important for us that are coming into communities and working with all kinds of Indigenous different communities. We started in 2014 with the Zibi in Ottawa and with the Algonquins. And so the team really started with the project of listening and doing everything from listening circles, from going into the communities and not only where we were at Zibi, but going into Quebec, different parts to learn about them. And then there was a formal collaborative benefits agreement that was established after listening and understanding and working with the community. That was established, that collaborative agreement that goes and covers everything from how to create placemaking, name making, honoring the history of the place, to ensuring that education opportunities are created to our partners, to social procurement, making sure that the companies, there's a percentage of the work that is going to get done that is actually going to be done by Indigenous-led, Indigenous-owned companies. And we're actually very proud of a success story that happened in Zibi. One of the most successful companies in Brownfield is actually an Indigenous company. It's called DeConte. It actually was named Canada's Brownfielder of the Year in 2019. And it started as a partnership with Zibi. And because it was such a large project, we gave them the capacity. They were able to create the capacity, create the experience, and they went on to get a lot more contracts to the point that now they're leading this. And this is, I think, is really important to create the capacity, create opportunities so that when we come with these different projects, it's actually much larger than the project itself. It's about creating opportunities to the people there, our partners. And there's housing involved and like I said, opportunities for education and employment as well. And I'll be talking a little bit more about other projects, as this is just one of several ones that we've been engaged. We're doing Quayside with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We're doing Le Breton, about to break ground, which I hope to talk a little bit in Ottawa as well. We worked in West Don Lands to assist in the creation of the Indigenous Health Hub. That is going to be tremendous opportunity, and it's so good here for the city of Toronto. But as a Dream, and particularly as Dream group of companies, we just don't do this work of reconciliation when we go into a community in the project. We, as a group of companies, because we have different companies, we have Office REIT, we have different kinds of companies, we have a very strong social procurement policy. And we're very keen, and we're very happy to say that 9% of our overall spend last year was actually towards Indigenous spend in 2023. And that includes spending from our Office REIT. It includes spending for CIB Capital, Quayside, and Le Breton. And we're adding more and more projects because we wanted to make sure that it's not only about saying, well, we're going to do the social procurement, is making sure that we account, we see the results, and we're accountable to those results. So that is very important. And then the third pillar that we do is obviously the education of our own employees, the opportunity and to have workshops that we do company-wide, and particularly around milestones, asking people to reflect, asking people to be allies, asking people to listen, and to continue on their journey to learn.
Kitchi, merci, Anna. Just to emphasize, I know you talked about a lot of great things that Dream is doing, but I just wanted to hone in on the procurement piece and the significance of economic reconciliation. Because when you're thinking about procurement and ensuring you're spending on and with Indigenous businesses, that's economic reconciliation, and there is so much power in that, supporting communities, working with communities so that they can prosper.
And the way that you put out the RFPs, the language that we use in the RFPs can be so powerful in creating that opportunity. We've seen it with some of the contracts that we had coming renewal, the amount of employment that we were able to create to diverse candidates and including Indigenous. We actually are measuring that even separately. It's really powerful.
Amazing. Merci. AJ, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Selina, and thank you, Anna, and thank you, Adriana. I feel like I'm kind of geeking out about this question because both of you sparked so many new ideas. And, Anna, when you're talking about, working with Indigenous peoples in partnership and not just looking at it when you go into community, but when you're actually in urban centers, I think is really important because sometimes we have a tendency to forget that really all of Canada is Indigenous land, including urban centers, and needing to create those spaces for partnerships with, the treaty or title holders on those lands in meaningful economic ways is very important. And Adriana, seeing how you are creating space for those places to come together and to celebrate and learn and engage in partnership with Indigenous peoples is just really amazing. So thank you so much for including me in this great conversation with you all. I kind of want to reflect on those and say, one of the things that I really love about this question that Selina has asked us is that the answers are really so different and so unique. And I think that that's not only it's okay, but it's actually great. And it's one of the things that I love most about talking about different pieces that people are doing in reconciliation is because there really is something for everyone. There's something for companies, for individuals, for educators, media, government, real estate. It's so diverse, and you can always find a place no matter where you're coming from in this journey. And everyone is at a different point in that journey too. And one of the things that I've been working on with Ariana and Berlis is developing an approach that sort of recognizes that as well, that incorporates various entry points into that conversation. So for example, Ariana and Berlis has done a lot of work over the last few years on educational programming, looking at, different examples of how you can partner with First Nation businesses, promote economic reconciliation, including doing some work on education over broader Indigenous history and ongoing experiences such as around residential schools, commemoration events. Some of these programs are available still for viewing. But I think the other piece that I really want to highlight is we're starting to move beyond some of those pieces as well. We're looking at also incorporating things like working with Indigenous suppliers as a part of regular business practices, purchasing from Indigenous-owned vendors, Indigenous-owned catering companies, including celebration of Indigenous arts and culture in just everyday firm events, right? You don't have to wait for September 30th or June 21st to have an Indigenous focus to your event or to your practice. And also, I've really noticed that individuals are taking a real leadership role in this as well. We have a number of people who have taken initiative to sign up for programs like the Indigenous Studies course that is offered by the University of Alberta, for example. It's totally free. It's available online. You can register yourself, register a small group, and develop that learning opportunity to promote your own education and awareness as you go through these steps. And so what this meant for our organization was that we had people who were at varying levels of their education and awareness journey. We had some people who were coming in and just starting that learning, and we had other people who'd had a lot of experience in this area and were looking to do more. So we developed a plan that includes some foundational topics, like, just frankly what I call an Indigenous 101 that talks about who are Indigenous peoples, looking at First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, because of course we want to not paint Indigenous people with one brush and recognize the diversity within that broader sort of Indigenous label. And then we've also done programming where we try and push these issues and this awareness to the next level, right? So a lot of people know about residential schools and history. We've recently looked at doing programming that actually brings that forward and says, okay, let's hear from people who are experiencing trauma on an ongoing basis, on an intergenerational basis. How can we be sensitive to those needs? How can we, as Anna said, push beyond, talking about Indigenous history and meaningfully look towards including Indigenous peoples in economic reconciliation today? And, how you issue RFPs matter, also how you break up RFPs matter. One of the things I've found is sometimes there is a tendency to group everything into one RFP, but if you actually break it up into smaller modules, you have a greater opportunity to increase Indigenous participation through some of those very simple things that you can do. So I love it, and I feel like I'm just geeking out, but I'm gonna pause now because I want to hear more from these other lovely ladies.
Thank you, Marcy and Jay. No, there is no shortage of information that the three of you can share. I'm switching slightly. I'm keen to hear your perspectives, and I'm going to go, Ariana and Anna, I'm going to ask you this first. If you could speak a little bit, based on your own experiences, what you've witnessed, what you've experienced, what do you see as the role of non-Indigenous folks in this work? Then, AJ, I'm going to ask you the same question from the perspective of an Indigenous woman. Go right ahead, Ariana.
I can start.
Thanks, Anna.
I think the intentionality is really important. You need to be intentional. You don't need to feel like you know it all. I feel that sometimes a lot of people don't engage more because they feel that they're going to be doing something wrong. They're going to be saying something wrong. They're going to do a mistake. They're going to, so it's better not to engage. And I think we need to take the response, like we said at the beginning and in our acknowledgement, this is all our responsibility. So if we start from that and then go with the intentionality to create these conditions for the economic reconciliation, for education, for the opportunities to come through, and go with it with an open mind and an open ear and listening. We're not there to tell our Indigenous partners how to get it done. We're there to create a relationship, a partnership. and to listen. And I think that is really important. I think that is basically our role, is to go in being intentional and listening.
I am regularly reminded that there is a reason that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for the listening you just talked about, Anna. Ariana,
you know, my thoughts are similar. You know, I've certainly thought about what my role as a non-Indigenous person is doing this work. And I think where I've come to is that it is to be active contributors to reconciliation. So similar to the intentionality piece, like exactly what that looks like depends on what your role is, what your job is, and where you are on that journey. But it's, you know, it's about doing something, and that could just be learning, you know, educating yourself, or going to an event, going to your first powwow. You know, those things are being active contributors to reconciliation. And if you do have the ability in your work to be to contribute, then I think it's about looking at, like, where can you make an impact? What levers can you pull? Where can you do it from where you're sitting? You know, it can be sometimes a bit of an uncomfortable, not in a bad way, uncomfortable place to be, like not wanting to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. You know, I'll just give an example. We have our 2nd annual movie night at Walmer Legacy Space this weekend in honor of National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So we're playing an Indigenous film, and none of our Indigenous partners could make it this weekend. Obviously, you know, they're home with their families, preparing for Monday, and we'll be in ceremony. And so we don't have any Indigenous, you know, part of our partners there with us. So I was like, well, should I, you know, is this a right place for me to be like leading this event? And I think it's okay. You know, it's first of all, we can't always put the burden on Indigenous people to have to do this, and it's okay for us to say, you know, let's all do this together. All of these, you know, there might be Indigenous people in the audience, but like, let all of us all together, let's learn, let's watch this amazing movie and learn something about Indigenous culture, and that's a step forward.
Merci, Ariana, and I really appreciate.
Selina, can I just add one more thing? I think when I talked about intentionality, the other side is also be ready to be accountable. I think that is really important. It's not only to talk about your intentions, it's actually to being accountable for the actions that you're going to be taking. Measurable results. I think we need to push for that.
So very true. And that integrity goes along with it, right? You're saying you're going to do something, you need to do that, right? You need to walk in that way. And there has to be action that goes along with those words. Great addition, Anna. AJ, I know as Indigenous folks, we often, and you touched on this area, we can take on the burden of doing this work. Some of us, myself, have chosen to take on the burden in our roles and how we support organizations like ULI. But I'm really interested, AJ, and you know, how you walk in this work, and what you think the role for First Nations and Métis can be in this work.
Thank you, Selina, and thank you, Adriana and Anna. I'm actually going to answer both sides of this question, because it's something that I hear a lot from non-Indigenous people is, you know, well, where is my space in this, right? Where is a place that I can come in and actually be part of this conversation without being respectful and without taking up space that should be, you know, properly for Indigenous people. And sometimes, you know, I see my role as an Indigenous person as saying, you know, yes, please come into these conversations. Please take on, you know, a leadership role in it. Please, you know, create those spaces like ULI is doing with this discussion today, and create those platforms within your organizations, because you know, at times like this, particularly around, you know, September 30th, it is a very busy time for us as Indigenous people and Indigenous communities. And there is work that, you know, we have to do within our families and our communities. So to ensure that that conversation doesn't stop, while we are doing some of the more internal work, and that there is still a national dialogue and presence on these. We need non-Indigenous people to pick up the torch and to carry a lot of that forward. I think for Indigenous people, the work can be very similar, particularly with such an amazing younger generation coming up through the ranks now. I'm lucky enough to, like Selina, have learned from elders and have been lifted up through the people who have come before us, who have, had the courage to tell their truths and to survive, horrifying events to bring us to where we are today. And I think we as Indigenous people have a responsibility to honor that and to ensure that their strength is never forgotten. I think we also have a responsibility to really push for more, right? More than just, reflection, more than just commemoration, but actually push for that action, that accountability that Anna was speaking of, and to create opportunities for those future generations that are coming up behind us so that we're not having the same conversations, 10, 20, 30 years from now. But a lot of that requires real partnership, right? We're none of us in this alone. And if we're going to move those yardsticks so that, next year, instead of, 9%, maybe it's 10%, maybe the year after it's 11, maybe eventually we get to 15, right? We're working in partnership, and that is how those changes are going to be accomplished, because none of us are going to be able to do it on our own, but together we are definitely stronger. And, as an Indigenous person, particularly as a First Nations person, I take a real responsibility of creating space for other Indigenous people to come forward, as well as, ensuring that we are creating space for our Métis colleagues like Selina and, Inuit colleagues and people on reserve, off reserve, like that diversity is always coming forward as a part of the conversation as well.
Selina, can I add something? I'm sorry to be always interrupting.
Please, keep going.
Alexandria touched on something that I thought it was important now about this, let's keep growing. And the fact that she gave the example of the RFPs, that sometimes, if you do it in little chunks, you're going to get more. And very often when we talk about these conversations, about reconciliation and doing agreements and how do you create community benefits and so on, everybody's like, well, we don't know where we're going to find the people. We don't know where we're going to find the companies. We have to get past that and say, okay, if we don't know, how do you create that capacity? What do we need to change? Are we looking in the right places? Are we putting these things in the right way? So that's the next step. So if we're not there, then let's create that capacity. Let's see how we can change things. And that is really important, how we do this work.
Wonderful. You can keep on talking anytime, Anna. You're sharing great wisdom and I appreciate it. I think somebody touched on earlier, right? It can be really hard, especially if you're at the beginning of your journey towards truth and reconciliation. It can be really hard to know what to do. I spend a lot of time trying to get people to act, to start to do something. And you can see that folks, are scared. They're scared. Their heart is in the right place. They just don't know where to begin, right? And some folks can be so scared of doing the wrong thing that they stop themselves from doing anything. And so I would love it if you could share, thoughts on how you got started and, what's a piece of advice that you would give to someone to help them get started on this journey. Anna, did you want to start?
It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, I don't know. I'm going to give you an example, not from my time at Dream, but actually, and Selina, I think you probably heard me say about this example that I'm going to talk about, which was when I was at the city and we were doing our housing plan. And we had, so I was chair of the planning and housing, and we had a large group of people from all different sectors of life, nonprofits, private sector, Indigenous groups. And we were talking about the use of land for affordable housing. And we were saying, okay, we're going to lease the land. This is really good. We're going to stop selling. We're going to start leasing the land. And one of our Indigenous partners said, well, it's going to be interesting for us to have to lease the land that was ours. And that was just a silent moment because we all were reflecting on what was said. And it was such a powerful moment. And it was a learning, and everybody was like, absolutely, like we need to do something different in these cases. But you know, there was a blind side. And recognizing that sometimes when we are entering these conversations, we all have it. And be ready to be vulnerable in those situations. We're all learning, but if you have that intentionality to do better and to do different, that's by having these conversations, that's the only way that we're going to get there.
I was just gonna add to that. I think, you know, the reason that you got that lesson is because you were doing something, you know, and that I think is my advice is like you learn by doing, and there's no guidebook, but by getting out there and doing something, you learn, and that's how we're gonna move this forward. And as you said, like, you know, you lead with good intentions and sincerity and, you know, some degree of cultural awareness, and you may make mistakes, but we're all still learning. I'm still learning, and Taz is still learning all the time. And, you know, rather than getting overwhelmed with, you know, big questions or not knowing what to do, like get started somewhere. I also wanted to share like a more practical example. Selina, you had asked us one of these questions beforehand, sort of like walk us through your early days, and it's a bit more of a practical example of sort of how to get started. One of our projects is on Tecumseh Street in King West and Niagara neighborhood. And we, you know, through some initial research, we learned that Tecumseh, the name of the street, is actually named after a Shawnee chief, and who is the leader of the Tecumseh Confederacy. Little tidbit: when the War of 1812 broke out between the United States and Britain, Tecumseh and the Confederacy allied with the British. So it's kind of a cool story. So we started trying to, you know, get more information on Tecumseh and who he was. I think that we called the Indigenous Affairs Office, it may have been you, Selina, that we talked to, and they encouraged us to talk to Phil Cote, who's a young spiritual elder, activist and artist. A lot of you probably know him. Well, his great-grandfather is the great-grandson of Tecumseh. Anyway, we arranged to meet Philip on site. And he was incredibly, you know, open and welcoming and encouraging of our vision for the project. We talked for like 2 hours, I think, about Chief Tecumseh and, you know, the natural heritage and the trees and the stars in the sky. It was one of those conversations, and it was really incredible, actually. And then from that, we had this idea to have a sacred fire on the site. So we invited Phil and people from Taz and our partners, and we did sort of a groundbreaking to honor the land's past and make way for its future. It was a really wonderful thing. And then we also continued to work with Philip to get, we did like a memo to understand history, the Indigenous history of the site. And now we're working on our cultural interpretation plan and looking at different ways that we can incorporate this history into the, you know, landscape and the landscaping plan and wayfinding and things like that. So, you know, it's again sort of on a smaller scale and not necessarily achieving those big economic outcomes, but it's important, I think, asking questions about the land, you know, meeting people and Indigenous elders and organizations that know about the neighborhood and about the land, connecting with them, and then doing something to honor that history. I think, you know, it's a kind of a way to get started.
And Selina, I can give you the example of what we're doing on Quayside, for example, as well. We're not doing this alone, right? This is relationships. This is partnerships. We're working with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We had a commitment that we were going to have them involved. And, you know, we now have, you know, 5 big areas that we've agreed that we're going to work together. So environmental stewardship, education, nature and cultural expression, equity and investment, and aging in place. And now all the work under here, it's not going to be done just by dream. It's going to be hand in hand. That's how success happens. That's how you see the results. And so I think that not being afraid as well and saying, well, this is a partnership. It's a relationship.
So true. Relationships, as folks are hearing, right, are the thread that tie all of this together. They're the critical component for all of this work. AJ, thoughts, advice that you can share with folks on how to get started?
Oh my goodness, my advice is really just very, very simple, and I think you all have said it already, but I will try and create a very short snippet of punchy advice that everybody can take with you, which is just do it. Like literally, I feel like I hear so much of the time from people, oh, I'm nervous about how to start. I don't know how to outreach to community. I don't know how to start building those partnerships. I'm so worried about doing something wrong, about making a mistake. And I don't want to minimize that concern at all because it is a fair feeling to have, but don't let that stop you from taking that first step, right? Recognize that you're going to stumble, you're going to make some mistakes along the way, and that's okay. Learn from those mistakes, adjust accordingly, and keep going. But the only thing worse than making a mistake and, is not doing anything at all, because that is in some ways choosing to accept the status quo, which I think we all can agree is not acceptable. So just do something, anything, take a step, take a leap, be fearless, and also don't be afraid to be uncomfortable in some of this work. I think Adriana mentioned this when she was speaking earlier, and reconciliation is not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be something that fits nicely within your comfort zone. You should have those moments of oh wow, this is changing my perspective. I am looking at something differently. I am, seeing this as Indigenous land, and, like the idea of having to buy back your own land, having to lease back your own land. Like, you should have those moments of, wow, that's the transformative change piece, right? And it's uncomfortable to be in those spaces. And I want to recognize that expressly as an Indigenous person. Like, it is okay to be uncomfortable. You should be making yourself uncomfortable through these spaces. And then you should use that, level of kind of uncomfort or like squishiness to propel yourself into action here. And Selina's laughing at me about the squishiness comment, but I think it's fair. But I do think it's important to acknowledge, because a lot of times people feel that uncomfort and then they turtle, or they go in on themselves and they use it as a reason to not keep pressing forward. But I think if we want to create those spaces for change, if we want to increase Indigenous participation, if we want to really look at land back in a very serious and real and meaningful way, it is by doing it through these partnerships, by making yourselves uncomfortable and using that as a motivation for change to keep moving forward.
I get a little bit excited when anybody says land back. I really want to emphasize, like, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. That is really critical in this work. Getting comfortable with the squishy feels, with that discomfort that AJ was just talking about. Okay, we are going to turn it into the Q&A portion, and Linda's going to help us make that happen. So thank you, Linda, for rejoining us.
Thank you, Selina, and thank you to the A team. You'll notice everyone's name starts with an A here. So we've got the A team. Thanks to Anna for pointing that out initially. And we actually have a question for Anna before your time started, Anna, but presumably you can give this a shot. Someone has noted that in 2021, DREAM committed to publishing the first private sector open source database of equity-seeking suppliers and local, independent, or socially responsible businesses. I remember hearing about this at the time, and I was so impressed, and I loved DREAM's commitment to both doing the work, which was, a really important foundational piece of work, but also then to be committing to sharing it. So there is a question about wanting to know where that's at. Is that still the plan in terms of building this database, and how will Indigenous suppliers be highlighted and supported through this tool?
It is still in the plan. I mean, we like I said, we are using it, and we had to create the systems as well internally to be accountable for what we're doing in our procurement and with our different projects. And we are creating that database, and it is still the plan.
Great to hear. I also wonder if any one of you can speak just a bit more deeply about how a company figures out who they should be talking to and who they should be building a relationship with. Because we know in some provinces there are treaty holders, there are ancestral lands, there are reserves in various places where nations live. And then there are also Indigenous people and variety of communities represented in urban centers. So any examples where any one of your organizations has gone into a particular community and figured out who they should be talking to?
I think in our case, it's all about engagement. How do you engage with the different communities and have that initial assessment? We use, offices like Selina's office as well, and government organizations, but also, engagement companies, Indigenous engagement companies, and then having the conversation. So, for example, in Le Breton, we have our advisory council has 11 Algonquin communities that we were able to bring together. So sometimes you bring more than one community, and you bring them together. Not always easy, like any partnership that has, any 11 partners, right? But you make that effort, you bring people together, and it's about, again, it's about the learning and making that effort to learning. So in Ottawa, for example, we're using an organization, it's called Innovation 7. It's an Indigenous engagement organization that assists us a lot with that kind of work as well, and with our research and reaching out to the different communities.
I think that's a really good suggestion, Anna, and there are so many Indigenous companies and Indigenous run engagement companies out there who you can partner with to help you answer that exact question. Another first step that you can always take is there's a number of provinces, and Canada has their Aboriginal and Treaty Rights Information System, which is an online database that will tell you whose title or treaty land you are on, which I think is a really wonderful tool. Any company can access it. It is public. You can just go on and click exactly where you are, and it'll pull up this is whose land you're on. I know National Geographic has also worked to create an Indigenous Traditional Territories map for that piece. And for me, when you're working in partnership, it really comes down to working in partnership with the rights holding nation, right? Whose nations and whose land are you on, and how are you developing that partnership with them? And I think Anna made a really great point around, it may not be just one community. It may not be like the most proximate First Nation reserve community, because to do that, you're leaving out sometimes Métis communities, you're leaving out urban Indigenous people. So how can you do that in an inclusive way, recognizing that you are likely going to need to structure your engagement with more than just one community, and maybe having different conversations depending on who you're working with. For example, when you're working, as you are with the treaty holders over Toronto, you're having a very different conversation with them than when you're working with people who are like myself or Selina, who are Indigenous people who live in Toronto and are guests on this territory, but not the treaty rights holder here. So just throwing that out there, but excellent question. And thank you so much, Linda.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, that's sort of the more important work, but there's also, an option to look at, who are the social service organizations? Where are the friendship? Is there a friendship center? What are the different organizations, Indigenous facing organizations in the area? We have one project in Scarborough where the Native Child and Family Services is just around the corner. And so, we engaged with them and talked to them and just tried to learn, look for opportunities. We actually were working potentially to incorporate an Indigenous early on center into the ground floor of that building. It didn't end up working out, but those, you get there by having those conversations and looking at the local stakeholder groups. In the annex, we're just around the corner for the Native Canadian Center. And so, we, for example, we donate the produce from our urban garden to them. So there's other ways beyond that, obviously really important engagement work that needs to be done with the treaty holders.
If I could just emphasize, Ariana just left off on, it's really important, right, to know whose treaty land you're on. That's true. What tends to happen, unfortunately, is urban Indigenous communities get left out of conversations. So I really, really encourage folks. Over 80% of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in the country called Canada live in an urban setting. So we really need to work with those amazing Indigenous-led organizations. Ariana mentioned a couple in that Toronto area, to connect to the urban folks that live here, that are accessing the space, that are accessing services, that want to see ourselves in the fabric of the places that we live, even if this isn't our territory, right? AJ mentioned both her and I are guests. Yes. So really, really encourage folks to think about how to engage with urban First Nations and Métis communities. It can, it takes a little bit more work to figure out where we are in the organizations, but it's really, really important because we are living.
We have two other questions, and I'd love to throw in a third as we've got 5 minutes left. We're looking for some guidance on how to mentor and hire Indigenous people, how Indigenous-owned businesses can get greater visibility with real estate companies, and any thoughts on the realm of the possible in terms of co-development or sharing of revenue or anything that really truly moves the needle on economic reconciliation. So anyone want to tackle any one of those?
I think so. DREAM has commitments. So for example, in Le Breton, we actually have 5% of all the construction is going to have to be done by Indigenous companies, and 5% of all the working hours have to be awarded to Indigenous individuals. So we're going to have to fulfill these commitments. We're going to be looking out there, and if there are companies, I would definitely reach out and that database that we talked about, that's why it's so important, because for how do you share this information is going to be really important. But if there's anybody out there with these kinds of business, I would definitely reach out to some of these companies that are dealing with community benefits agreements and plans that have some of these deliverables already committed to.
We're working on some, really exciting opportunities, sort of shared investment, shared equity opportunities where we're finding partners, where we're looking to build housing. And, I think given where the real estate market is and the sort of different levels of funding that are available, that I think, some of these opportunities, hopefully a year from now, we'll be able to talk more concretely about them. But I think there's some really great opportunities for partnership in terms of building housing.
No, I think those are really, really great suggestions. And, I'm picking up on one of the questions in the chat, which is how do you go about getting sort of your business out there, getting your name out there, getting your brands out there? And it is challenging. I think it's challenging on both sides. I've heard it from people who are looking to partner with Indigenous peoples. Sometimes, they say, oh, we just don't know where to find these businesses. And I'm like, well, are you looking? Because, there's a lot, like almost every First Nation has economic development arms. There's increasing commitments, like has been made by DREAM, to put together a list of different organizations. I know this is something that is being worked on at the national level as well, with the creation of kind of a First Nations procurement organization and a list of businesses to partner with there. I think, as well, during the pandemic, there's been increasingly online presence by Indigenous businesses. So, just getting the name out there, reaching out to partners, like I think many of the people on this call and many of the members of ULI, around how can you share that information, how can you promote that information, is a really great way to start.
Thank you all. Selina, any last words before we wrap up?
I get very focused on supporting Indigenous talent, recruiting and retaining Indigenous talent. It's a part of my role that I take really, really seriously at the City of Toronto. And part of the reason I do that is because I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't have Indigenous women mentors who created safer spaces for a number of Indigenous staff. This was happening when I was at the province. I had spent all of my career to that point, so I've been in government for almost 30 years, so this is about 16 years. I had intentionally kept my identity separate. I was active in the Métis Nation as a youth, raised in culture, raised with language, but because of experiences my family had, they told me to be quiet about that in more public spaces. And it wasn't until I saw strong Indigenous women in the Ontario Public Service where I was working, creating these spaces for Indigenous talent, creating spaces for us to talk. They helped me feel empowered and supported and safer. And so, think about what your organization looks like. Do you have, would I be able to see myself in your organization? Would I feel supported to come and work with you? And if the answer is no, what can you do to create, to bring folks in to create that kind of environment? Because it makes all the difference. I wouldn't be where it was without those two particular women paving the way.
That is a fantastic thing to leave people with. Thank you so much, Selina. Thank you to Anna, Ariana, and AJ, and to everyone who joined in. We'll leave you with one final slide about upcoming programming. Hope to see some of you there. And thank you so much for everyone joining in. Have a good day.